Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very special India Center event. My name is Laila Chacko, and I am the Director of Public Affairs for the India Center. So I have the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker today. He arrived at UCF yesterday morning, and we have been keeping him very busy. In the morning yesterday, he did a taping with Global Perspectives TV show at WUCF. And then he had a late night evening with community members, and then a visit to Florida Space Institute this morning. So we are making the most of having this esteemed guest at UCF. And we are very privileged to have him for this as part of our lecture series. So Mr. Dhruva Jaishankar is Executive Director of ORF America. And he's also a non-resident fellow with the Lowly Institute, which is a think tank in Australia. And he's written regularly for the Hindustan Times. His research on India's relations with the US, Japan, Australia, Southeast Asia, and Europe, and also on defense and security policy, and globalization, democracy, and technology, has been published in several books, policy reports, and publications, including Foreign Affairs and Foreign Policy. Mr. Jaishankar was a fellow in Foreign Policy Studies at Brookings, India, and the Brookings Institution in DC. And he was a program officer and then transatlantic fellow with think tank German Marshall Fund in DC. And there he managed the Trilateral Forum. And previously, he worked as a research assistant at the Brookings Institution and as a news writer and reporter for CNN IBN, and that was in Delhi. Mr. Jaishankar has a BA in History and Classics from Macalester College and an MA in Security Studies from Georgetown, and he's the author of Vishwa Shastra, India and the World. So you can see a copy up there. It's going to be released in the US later this year and is already published in India. So now I hand it over to Dr. Joshi.
Thank you so much, Laila. First of all, for the introduction. Second, for arranging this wonderful public event. Laila is the real force behind the Media Center, and I can't thank her enough, as well as Liliana, who is one of our student interns. So thank you. So welcome to the first public lecture of the Media Center in spring 2025. India Center at UCF is an incubator of ideas, research, and education on contemporary India between UCF and Indian Institutes of Higher Learning. It is also a platform to facilitate a deeper understanding of India in the United States and of the United States in India through dissemination of knowledge and cultures and through creating awareness and engagement with the Indian American community. In November last year, during the investiture ceremony, we had declared that India Center within the next year will have 3 flagship programs. The India Studies Certificate Program at UCF, combining many disciplines in social sciences, business and economics, and hospitality. Second, that we will initiate a distinguished lecture series to bring high-profile and high-impact individuals to UCF and the Indian American community. And lastly, that we will start an annual India lecture series at UCF, bringing experts on various facets of a rising India, not only to UCF, but also to the Indian American community. I'm happy to let you know that the India Studies Certificate Program is all set to materialize from next semester. For the distinguished lecture this year, we have a confirmation from Dr. Vivek Lal, who is the Chief Executive Officer of General Atomics, Global Corp, and who will address the UCF students, faculty, and the Indian American community on 2nd of April 2025. Finally, for what we have gathered here today, we have Dhruva for our first lecture in the annual India lecture series. I can't thank Dhruva enough for helping us get this initiative running, but I also think that both Dhruva and his research are pivoting to the mandate of the India Center, but also symbolize what a rising India looks like and requires to grow internally and cement its place in the world. Dhruva is a prolific public intellectual working on many things, but his work on India's technology policy is particularly impressive. I will let Dhruva address this gathering in a short while, on a subject of utmost importance to India in contemporary times and is central to India's quest for becoming an advanced economy by 2047, its quest for technology. The emphasis on technology has been central to the idea of India since its independence. Technological artifacts, as Nehru would call them, temples of modern India, are a key feature of the post-colonial state. Yet even when producing some of the best human resources, and many of them in this room are an example of that, in science and technology, India has struggled with incubating and developing the requisite technological capital. Dhruva's talk and his recently published book, Vishwashastra, will answer many of these questions on India's approach to technology, incubation, and development. Without much ado, I would like Dhruva to deliver the first annual India lecture for the India Center. Dhruva, the floor is on you.
Thank you, Yogesh, for the generous introduction. Thank you, Mila. It really is a privilege and pleasure to be in Florida. I was telling several people yesterday, it's my first time back in Florida in 20 years, which is far too long. And I hope that the next time I come back will be much sooner. It's been wonderful to learn about some of the activities here. We had a really eye-opening visit to the Florida Space Institute at UCF. Really quite an exciting time to be working on some of the issues that UCF seems to be focused on. I also want to thank the India Center in particular, including many of the generous donors, some of whom are in the room here with us. I had the pleasure of meeting and interacting with a lot of them yesterday evening. It really is a great initiative that you're doing here. I am concerned, and I'll get into why in a second. A great concern for me is that India and the US are two important growing countries, and yet the understanding in each other's countries of each other is not where it should be. And it is exactly programs like this that will help over the long run in developing that understanding, including those ideas, facilitating interactions. And we've done some really remarkable things by having some dedicated staff and facilities focused on that, and also looking at modern and contemporary India especially. I am happy to talk about a number of things about my work. I work at a public policy think tank in Washington, D.C. called ORF America. I'm happy to talk about, I get questions, what is a think tank, what do you do on it? People, even my family members seem to think I just sit in a room with a pencil and come up with ideas. That's not what we do, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit more. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about my book, which is unfortunately not published in the US yet. It is a book it's an introduction to India and the world. And it came out last month in India. It's available on Kindle here in the United States, but not in hard copy. The book does three things. One is it provides a very brief historical overview of India's interactions with the world from ancient times to the present day. It in fact ends in 2024 with some developments there. It's the second thing it does. It tries to cover not just any region, but particularly regions, of course. So we have a little bit on India's interactions with Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, the United States, Soviet Union, China, a lot of China, Pakistan, the United States, and others. A little bit on Latin America. Secondly, the book, the sort of last third of the book focuses on the future. What are India's priorities today? How is it trying to achieve those objectives? So it is really an international relations book, but it touches on a lot of subjects. Finally, the book also has at the end about 250 other books listed as reference. So if you want to know more about India-US relations, India-China relations, about the role of economics and technology, it has recommendations for further reading. But while I was writing this book over the past few years, and it was a very long process, one of the things I kept coming back to was how important the role of technology was in India's interactions with the world. And even if you're not interested in India, it's quite fascinating how international relations, politics, including domestic politics, the political economy, and technology all in some ways interact with each other. It's not new necessarily, although the relevance of it is changing in some very important ways, as many of you might already feel. In some ways, it's always been a global character to technology, and whether that's in the form of competition or cooperation. And you can go back to ancient history to look at some of this. In the early world, systems of how writing was developed and shared changed over time. And you can see that in India's import and export of various scripts and writing systems. And you see that in the minting of coins and the development of storage mechanisms for grain. You see that in agricultural technologies and navigation and seafaring technologies. And so there are plenty of examples of how these technologies started in one part of the world, spread, in some cases were independently discovered and harnessed in different parts of the world at the same time. You see examples, for example, of agricultural techniques coming up in parallel in the New World and in the Old World. But there are also examples of how this played out in politics. So, for example, between India and China, after the 9th century, there was suddenly accelerated contacts, often not direct contacts, but through Tibet, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. And you saw, for example, the export from India eventually to China of certain medicinal, astronomical, and agricultural technologies, including sugar production, and India importing things like gunpowder and paper-making technologies. There were also, even a later period when India was more closely integrated with the Islamic world, but also had early contacts with Europe in the early age of discovery. You had some very interesting technological flows. For example, I recount an anecdote of the Portuguese arriving in India in late 1400s and early 1500s and finding gun-making technologies that was superior to what they had back in Europe, which Indians had developed and imported in turn from the Middle East, what was today the Middle East. So again, in some ways, technological flows had these unanticipated consequences that shaped the world in some very unpredictable ways. But as Yogesh mentioned in his opening remarks, once India became independent in 1947, one of the earliest things that India's leaders had to contend with is how to modernize the country. India at its birth was large, diverse, democratic, and poor. And I don't think there's any other country that had that combination of characteristics at the same scale or to the same degree as India had. And so almost immediately you saw India embarking on India's leaders embarking on this question of how do we modernize, how do we become a modern country. That part of that means how do we import and absorb and make use of what were then cutting edge technologies. There were some interesting experiences in that. India turned to different partners at different times. It turned to,
Yeah.
is this better? Oh, is it? I'm fine talking.
Use your free hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this better? Thank you. So there are a few examples. India turned, for example, to the United States. The U.S. ambassador in 1947, very shortly after, to India, came to India with a proposal that we can help you with dam making and engineering. Strangely enough, one of the Indian responses is we have to limit the amount of machinery used because the concern was employment. Yet you also have some success. Some of you may be familiar with the Tennessee Valley Authority. There was cooperation with what was called the Damodar Valley Corporation in India, which is in India and of course today West Bengal, Jharkhand, Bihar, still has in fact. So you did see this sort of very early technical cooperation start between the United States and India. With what was then West Germany, India actually turned to West German engineers to help with its new defense industry. India's first indigenously developed fighter jet was done with the help of a German engineer named Kurt Tank, who achieved some notoriety because he'd been a Nazi and had been rehabilitated after the war. India also turned to the UK. Many people may know that India is part of the Commonwealth. It's mostly Anglophone countries, former British colonies. But one of the reasons why India did it, despite the partition and concerns about Britain supporting Pakistan, was that there were economic and technological benefits to doing so. The leaders from these countries got together for advance something called the Colombo Plan, and this facilitated educational exchanges, technological exchanges that helped India in various ways in agriculture, medicine, and urban planning. Somewhat later, in 1955, or a little before 1955, India also turned to the Soviet Union. And until that point, actually, there were a lot of concerns about Soviet communism and Moscow supporting revolutionaries in India. And then in 1955, the Soviet Union agreed in what was the first agreement with a non-communist country, certainly at scale, to support a steel plant in central India. And so you had, again, the Soviet Union supporting the steel and metallurgy development. And soon India also turned to the Soviet Union for defense articles as well. Initially transport aircraft, but eventually MiG-21 combat jets. And so our thing is that this early reach out to many different partners, the US, Germany, UK, Soviet Union, did produce some results. And I think we take some of the success stories for granted. Some of you in this room may be products of the Indian Institutes of Technology, IITs. They've become sort of world-renowned for producing a lot of tech talent. But the first 5 IITs were set up by various consortiums, including US universities, the USSR, the UN, Germany, and the UK, all contributing things. They contributed some of the first lab equipment to the IITs. The nuclear program, something Professor Joshi has done a lot of work on, also develops in various ways, particularly the civilian side of it, from help with other countries. So India had one of the most advanced nuclear programs, at least in the developing world, by the 1960s. Another example, the Green Revolution. After 1965, these high-yield varieties of wheat that were developed in Mexico by American scientists were then imported and distributed at scale in India. And this really made a country that had been very prone to famines prior to the 1960s much more self-sufficient. So I give these as some examples of how there were very successful attempts at harnessing what were then cutting-edge technologies and using them to advance the material well-being of India over the years. There's also some examples in the post-1991 period. 1991 was the year, some of you may know, where the Indian economy liberalized. There were many other developments. The Soviet Union collapsed at that time. And this opened up another series of other opportunities. It extended to public health. You had large-scale vaccination programs, often with help of international institutions such as the World Health Organization. You had a telecom revolution. Suddenly, something that, it was, for people who remember pre-1991 India, it sometimes took 2 years or more to get a telephone line connected to your house. Suddenly, you had cheap handsets and cell phones, initially 2G, then 3G, then 4G, start to spread out to the point that it's really today's become very much a part of most Indians' day-to-day life. Another set of sort of strange things happened in the late 1990s, which is there were the fears over what was then called Y2K. Most of the students here may not be old enough to remember it. But for those of us who lived through it, there were real fears that the world would shut down and computers would crash at the turn of the millennium. And this actually created a massive global demand for low-cost English-speaking engineering talent. And suddenly these IITs, which had been set up 40 years before, suddenly there was a huge demand for this. It didn't happen overnight. It was not purely accidental. There were also some policy changes that the Indian government made in the 1990s. They dropped duties on the import of computational equipment. They started subsidizing high-speed, what was then considered high-speed connectivity, broadband connectivity. They also made it easier for licensing for companies to set up. And that's why Bangalore emerged in some ways as a hub for the Indian tech sector. Another sort of probably final example I would give of the how India somewhat successfully harnessed technology was the development of metro rail systems. And again, I remember a time when people said the idea of a sort of modern public transit system in a city, in an Indian city, was just an impossible dream. People would go to Japan and Europe and New York and see these metro rails, and why can't we have something like that in India? And yet after 1995, we saw a number of very innovative mechanisms emerge for India to get financing, including from Japan, quite significantly, getting initially rolling stock trains themselves from South Korea, eventually also from Canada and Germany, working with American software providers and companies like Siemens in Germany, getting training in Hong Kong. And so this became a very international endeavor to create what then became a very Indian product, something that serviced a lot of people. And that had a replication effect. So today there are about 20 different metro rail systems around India. And it's really transformed sort of the urban environment in Indian cities. So I'm giving sort of a number of case studies of sort of what I think are successful ways in which the politics, economics, and technology came together to advance people's well-being in a country like India. But the fact is, there were many other areas where this did not happen. And despite sometimes the intentions of Indian leaders, there are many ways in which India remained quite far behind the rest of the world. And one has to sort of look back and see sort of why did that not happen. I think in my reading of things, it was really a combination of three factors. One there was some interesting sort of ideological hang-ups that existed. On the left, there was a lot of resistance from on political grounds, on ideological grounds, vested interests in India for not wanting change. And even some what we think of very obvious changes in the 1980s, the then Rajiv Gandhi government tried to make some what are pretty innocuous changes to the business environment. They got a lot of pushback from political certain sections of the political establishment in India. At the same time, India didn't benefit from a completely controlled economy like you had in the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact countries. So in some ways, when the Soviet leaders met with their Indian counterparts, they were sometimes confused that Indian leaders could not control labor and production in the same way that a truly communist country could. So India didn't have either the advantages fully of a capitalist market-based system nor a state command and control economy. I think the second problem was really just a poverty of financial resources. India did not have the foreign exchange reserves to leverage its scale and leverage demand. And so this meant that it kept on going for what was relatively cheap licensed production, which meant that you could never absorb that technology. India was always buying, say in the defense sector, buying one squadron of aircraft at a time rather than buying at scale. And buying at scale would then not only bring down the economies of scale, but give the bargaining power to leverage, to get better terms of production. And so that was constantly an issue, and that has improved a little bit over time as India's resources have grown. So instead, for example, India turned to the Soviet Union largely because they offered a very nice sort of attractive package deal that included technology, licensing, financing, all together. And finally, I think there was this constant tension, and it's displayed out in the nuclear realm, and not just in the nuclear realm, between foreign dependency and strategic autonomy. And as a result of that, India, on the one hand, India wanted an independent nuclear deterrent, and yet on the other hand wanted international cooperation for the civilian nuclear program and electricity production. And as a result, India found itself often at the receiving end of discriminatory export controls. And you can argue whether this was warranted or not, but the fact is that you had Indian entities that were, particularly cutting-edge technologies, were often denied those technologies. Again, this played out mostly in the nuclear realm, but indirectly affected many other areas, including defense and including some civilian technologies. In fact, only recently, just in the last few weeks, that the US even lifted some restrictions on some Indian nuclear entities. So it still has a legacy. What is India finally sort of, the last part of this is a problem. What is India doing about it? I would say a few things. One is, I think a lot of effort has been made over the past 20 odd years in two areas. One is diversification of India's partners. So today, India has relatively good relations with the US, with the European Union, with the UK, with Russia, with Japan, and many others, and maybe with the exception of China and Pakistan, has very relatively positive relations. And so diversifying and maintaining those relationships has always been pivotal. Another thing is there has been a concerted attempt at reducing export controls. There was a landmark US-India civil nuclear agreement that was announced in 2005. It was finally finalized in 2008. And this actually helped to reduce a lot of the barriers on export controls in the nuclear sector, but again, the spillover effects in many other high technology areas. But other efforts have been made. India has been integrated into a lot of export control regimes, such as the missile technology control regime, on arms, chemical and biological weapons, and things like that. So that has been another sort of main focus, and has accomplished a lot, but there's now today a fear of new denials. That is, a new set of emerging technologies are going to create a new set of barriers, and on some areas India may be included in this, and it's making an effort to be included in this. In some areas there's a risk of being excluded, and a good example of this were some of the AI chip diffusion rules that were laid out by the tail end of the Biden administration, and which put India in a sort of second category of countries for the export of certain cutting-edge AI chips. While much of the focus again has been on diversification and the reduction of export controls, two other areas are perhaps today much more deserving of attention. One is simply improving procurement processes, and this applies in more the public sector in India, that is defense, in other areas the government is buying. And there have been many challenges associated with that, mostly specific to India. Specifications of what India wants are often vague, they're overly ambitious, they don't align with what India has the financial ability to purchase, and sometimes the processes are not transparent enough. So improving some of the procurement processes is one area. And then the second is just improving the financial outlays. A number of ingredients are required, these are well known, as to what a country needs to absorb technology. So, financial outlay study is one. Suspending, you have to buy it. Subsidies in certain areas, certain critical areas. Workforce improvements, certain regulatory and customs changes, and aligning foreign agreements. And so you have seen certain steps, and having a little more detail, that India has taken to actually improve some of that. But the end goal, in some ways, is to how do you scale in India and how do you indigenize. And in some ways, that has been the central challenge in India historically and even in more recent times. The focus, I think, is also where you prioritize. You can't do everything at once. Even a government is limited in what it can buy. But there has been now an outline of what some areas of focus are. And I mentioned this because these are areas that many of you work on, including the technology space. In defense, this includes aerospace engines, missile systems, drones, and counter-UAV unmanned aerial systems, surveillance and radars, and maintenance, repair, and overhaul. And you're seeing a major push in these areas for India to start investing, developing, and increasingly exporting some of these technologies to other places. There are other areas that have been surprisingly more difficult. Shipbuilding, there's now a global shortage of large hulls, both for commercial and for military applications, and even the US is struggling with this area. So there's really a market that's been cornered by a few players, China, South Korea, a few others. And so this is going to remain a challenge. On the civilian side, the focus has been on a suite of critical and emerging technologies. Computational hardware is one. Infrastructure, in both digital and physical infrastructure, energy, including clean and green energies, transportation, health and biotech, and defense and aerospace. I mean, these are the sort of really the industrial areas where the Indian government has been doing a lot. And it's been a few things. One is creating incentives for production, for manufacturing, often through through tax incentives. Secondly, creating some more regulatory clarity. In the last 2 or 3 years, India has issued a number of major regulations related to defense, AI, space, geospatial information, and drones, which are meant to give at least the outline of what regulation looks like in those areas. In some cases, the Indian government has set up a specific nodal agency, a kind of a war room to focus its efforts on. This includes semiconductors, quantum, and green hydrogen. And they're usually situated within a ministry to facilitate intergovernmental, interagency cooperation. And then finally, you've seen India enter into a very vast range of agreements with other countries to harmonize standards, invite investment, facilitate technology transfers, and strengthen supply chains. And this includes a dialogue between the national security advisors between India and the United States called ISET, the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technologies. It includes the Quad, which is a grouping of the US, India, Japan, and Australia. It includes, there's a supply chain agreement through a US-led initiative called IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, that was finalized. India was actually one of the first to ratify that. And then a trade and technology council with the European Union. The EU has only two such mechanisms, one with the United States and one with India. And then finally a suite of new trade agreements, including with Australia, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Mauritius, and 4 European countries. So these are just some of the steps that, the policy steps that India is taking in a bid to accelerate the process that I said, have described has been historically frustrated for a number of reasons. But while the direction today is much more clear, the challenge is, I think, sustaining this. There are many countervailing trends that are underway, both geopolitical and economic, that will complicate this quest for technology. Finally, just touching on a point I think that was raised yesterday in my interaction with many people in the community. What are some of the remaining challenges that India faces? And this is, I'm channeling in some ways what I hear from people who are trying to invest more and work more in the space. On the military side, I'd say the two biggest challenges are lack of predictability in procurement. It often takes many years for India to identify, let alone acquire, new defense equipment, which often deters potential sellers. In some ways, it's sort of three different negotiations rather than one. And that's made things very difficult. And then the second is predictable expenditure, and that has to do with some of the budgeting issues in the government. On the civilian side, why are people not investing more in India? There are many reasons to do so. Macro stability, fiscal health, demographics, relatively large STEM workforce, booming digital payment system, and larger infrastructure spending. If you go to the airports today in India, they're brand new, many more are being built, new highways all the time. At the same time, they're deterred by things, duties, and sometimes when a complex system is manufactured in India, the manufacturer has to pay duties multiple times because things are exported and re-imported again. And so that's a problem. Regulatory harmonization. India is a federal government, federal structure, so sometimes the states and the central government do not necessarily agree on policy. There are often high logistics costs. India has brought down the cost of logistics significantly, but you're in a much more competitive international environment. And so today, Vietnam can, move a container out of a port 3 times as fast as India can. So India is no longer pegged to an India of the past. It's pegged to competitors such as Vietnam, Philippines, Mexico, in many of these areas. There's still questions about workforce quality, market access. I would say the biggest one, the one I remain most concerned about, is private investment in India. While we've seen a real surge of public investment in the past 4 years, by my estimation, I think that this might be a little bit old already. The Indian government has spent $48 billion on critical and emerging technologies in the past 2 to 5 years since the pandemic. Which when you're talking about this is equivalent, on scale at least to the IRA, or we're talking a similar scale to very large public spending. Yet there isn't yet a sense that private investment is picked up sufficiently. And so I think one of the tricks over the next year or two is whether that happens and whether that in turn attracts more foreign interest. So with that sort of very kind of complex scale, in some ways it tries to weave in aspects of politics, geopolitics, economics, and technology. I want to give you a sense of why it matters for someone like me who's interested in this from an international relations perspective, but why it also matters for people like you, whether you're in the sciences, developing certain critical and emerging technologies, or whether you're on the political or economic side and hoping to make, to do business in this area, or are you simply interested in the geopolitical implications. So with that, happy to answer any questions, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dhruva, for such a comprehensive overview on India's tryst with technology. Its continued engagement, its successes, its promises, but also the battles which lie ahead. I have a few questions of my own, but I want to give the floor to the audiences first. Dr. Jyoti, please.
Excellent talk. Thank you so much. I learned a whole bunch. You gave us a 30,000 view, almost like what's in the book, by Kindle, very fast. Thank you. 2 points, please. One, can you bring it home to us?
Yes.
With our friends sitting here and the opportunity for somebody from this group and the India Center to join the think tank so we can see materialistically how we're involved locally with this process, because the whole thing is just too big to be grasped otherwise. Second point, please forgive me for this. India, technology, big words. One of the things we're missing in there, which is unfortunately blatant, and I've heard this question asked many times of leaders, blatant corruption, which limits a lot of the things. I'm from Andhra, I do with Chandrababu Naidu. When he started the revolution, it's better now when you pay taxes, you pay something that's written, it's documented. The Aadhaar cards, all these are made better. Can you please help us understand so people around us will say, no, India is not as corrupt as it appears, but there is a problem. You just mentioned the container going slowly down. All of us have noticed that. Thank you so much.
Sure. So in some ways, the first part of your question, what can an India Center here do? I mean, I'm very positive and optimistic. I think we can do a lot, and we put in some of the ingredients necessary to do a lot. I think play to the strengths of a university like this. I mean, again, that's partly why I wanted to visit the Florida Space Institute, and I know there's also incredible work on cyber, on healthcare, on other areas. I think, again, 3 things come to mind. I mentioned this yesterday as well. One, be a bridge to get Indians to come here, make it an attractive place for Indian students to come. It's happening organically. There are almost 400,000 Indian students in the United States, but increasingly universities are competing for some of the same students. And so playing on the strengths that are here to put UCF on the map in India, that seems to be one way to go. A second, and again, it's a really leading institute in certain areas. Second, make it a place for people who don't know anything about India to learn about India, right? So I think it's really nice to see many of you in this room with different kinds of. So it should be a way to learn that there are incredible opportunities in a place like India, whether it's for business, whether it's for technology, but also how to navigate the space. And some of that you can do through exchange programs. The third is, I think, just becoming a bridge for the two. So, that's why having a conference here, having a speaker series where you can bring Indians here. So, it seems like these are ways in which it can be done, but playing to the strengths of the institution makes a lot of sense.
Can you include one of our students in your think tank?
We've actually been talking about that, about doing internships. I was speaking to Professor Jaishankar about the possibility of doing that. Absolutely there are ways to do it, and I think it's really encouraging to see the path ahead. On the question of corruption, I mean, there's no silver bullet to corruption. It exists in every society, some more than others. I think, one of the challenges, and there is a technological role here, so it gets back to education. One of the challenges has always been, how do you make public services what's the word I'm looking for? it shouldn't matter who you are. In some ways, it should not matter who your connections are. So let me give you the example of the phone line, right? It used to be you'd apply for a phone connection. There'd be a backlog of 2+ years at least, sometimes 5 years. But you could jump the queue if you had a friend who was a cousin of somebody who happened to be in the ministry that worked in telecom, and you put in a favor, and that person might, make a call and sort of get somebody to come and, jump the queue, and you get it 1 year around 5 years. But this is a very costly system. I mean, the transaction costs are quite high. And so it didn't really matter who you were in some ways, which is not fair, and also, makes scaling difficult. Well, today, you can go get a new phone connection in India. It sometimes takes less than a minute. You just have to show an ID card, you have a fingerprint. And I've seen it happen on college campuses. Somebody did set up a booth, and you come to show that who you were, and you would get a SIM card. It didn't matter who you were. I just give that money. It's not silver bullet. It doesn't mean that all corruption is going to go away. But systems like that help to prevent that. It's faster today to get a passport than ever any time ever before. Clearing customs is easy. Now, so I think it doesn't mean that the system is going to be perfect. Technology is not the only solution. Ultimately, it's about. But once you create that expectation, it helps to say, well, I'm not going to pay a bribe to do that because there are ways of doing it. So I think scaling will require those efficiencies, and that in turn will have to. So I would say I don't think that again, corruption is not going to go away. It doesn't go anywhere, but there are steps that we've already seen many steps that have.
A request. Corruption has gone down by my own personal experience over 40, 50 years of traveling to India. Can we use your technology or something to showcase to the world that we're actually doing better? It's not as bad as people think it is.
Oh no, so I think the only way to do that is through experience, and the more, I know people who've had business in India, had a bad experience, say I'm never going to go back again. That's unfortunate, but the fewer and fewer cases that you have that. In fact, a colleague of mine has an article that's coming out tomorrow on what the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, that Elon Musk has set up, can learn from the other experience. Because he was involved in so this, by the way, for people who don't know, this is the biometric identification system that the Indian government set up. It was very controversial at the time. People thought it would violate people's privacy. But today, this is kind of the backbone for people setting up banking accounts, getting phones, and then using the phone, bank account, and identification to avail of a whole number of, a lot of other social services as well. So today, things like rations, food security, other things are dependent on this system. But it got a lot of creating a new government department. There are a lot of parallels actually with what Elon Musk says he wants to do with DOGE.
Yeah. So, Indians are very intelligent people, and it's a fact because the majority of the CEOs of different companies are Indians. Okay, but India is not as is reflected as an intelligent place. I think the major concern is a growing population. So is there any ways or policies or your government is planning to apply so that the real education and the beauty of India shines and the other portion goes down?
So there's a famous statement that a politician made in Parliament in the 70s or 80s when Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister. He said, why are Indians successful all over the world except in India? It's kind of a slightly cruel to have, which is so clearly you're not doing enough to harness the potential of people in India. Again, that's not 100% true, I'm not saying that is, but that is often an impression. I do think there are challenges, and there are challenges with workforce and skills and training in India. I'm not sure demographics are necessarily the problem. In fact, the largest number of Indians were born between 2005 and 2007. And they are coming of age now. They're entering adulthood. So every school year now that we're going to see in India will have slightly smaller number of people. So we're already, in some ways, past the demographic hump. The overall population still grows because more people are being born than are dying, but in some ways you're past this demographic hump that people were very concerned about for a while. What that does, one of the advantages we've seen this in China, is that allows the same resources to grow. You're no longer spreading it thin. You can actually improve quality. And so, again, this presents an opportunity. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it certainly presents a valuable opportunity over the next few years to improve the quality of skills and education at the undergraduate level and the high school level going down. There are other ways, again, India has been made remarkable use of distance learning, like finding modules online and helping with upskill people. There are still major challenges, and one of the things, we were talking yesterday about semiconductors, for example, where India is now investing quite a lot, spent almost $20 billion on trying to set up a semiconductor infrastructure. One of the things they've done is working with a US company to help training training a sufficient workforce so that when someone comes online in the next few years. So there is a lot more in that space that can be done. To be honest, one of the challenges we've been talking about this in the university setting has simply been that the higher education system in India remains relatively closed and quite difficult to partner with relative to other places. So that remains a challenge.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, great conversation, really enjoyed it. My name is Deepa Fernandez and I'm a PhD student here in healthcare technology. So I actually have two questions. One is about your book, like the name is interesting and I'm curious about how you came up with that. But the second one is healthcare technology, so that I'm interested in, and that didn't come up yet, and I'm interested in what your thoughts are about that as an emerging technology.
I'm not very capable of answering that second question, but I'll try. So the book's called Vishwa Shastra. It's a combination of a few things. My initial working title for it was An Introduction to India and the World, and my publisher, Penguin, said, that's a terrible title, no one's going to read it, it sounds boring. So I had to come up with a catchier title. Essentially it means a treatise on the world. And it comes from, there's a tradition in India going back over 2,000 years of what are called Shastras, which are treatises on subjects. One of the most famous is called the Arthashastra. It's an old work on statecraft and governance, and sort of treatise on how to govern. So I'm kind of riffing off of that. The Vishwa part, meaning world, has been sort of repopularized recently in India because the Prime Minister talks about India wanting to be a Vishwamitra, friend to the world. Others say that it is like a Vishwa Guru, so bringing knowledge to the world. So I basically combine those two terms, so basically say it's the treatise on the world. It's a little bit misleading in one respect, which is most of these treatises traditionally spoke about generalities. A good king should do this and have this many advisors and should do this on tax collection and things like that. But what I've done is very different, which is I've tried to I wanted this to be empirical. I wanted to lay out, make this a basic introduction for what happened, when, how, why, and let readers be informed by that rather than sort of abstract theories. So it's a little bit misleading in that respect, but the basic term is a treatise on the world in Sanskrit, the Indian language. On healthcare technologies, honestly, there are many people in this room who know much more about this. I'm not a healthcare professional. I do think, my initial thoughts are just sort of, there's a positive aspect and a negative aspect on health. There is a huge demand in both the United States and India to invest more in healthcare technology. We all know that. The challenges are very different in the two countries. In the US, you have an aging population, very high health costs, but very good, very innovative, obviously cutting edge on that front. In India, you have a requirement for low-cost healthcare, sometimes simply, providing some very basic needs, but you also have these real pockets of excellence. You have, surgeons, doctors, who are really world-class, right? To the point where you now have medical tourism. You have people coming from the Middle East and Southeast Asia to India, cheaper, and even from the West to India because it's cheaper to get the same surgery done there rather than at home. So the question is, how do you have these two, again, the common challenge with very different circumstances, how do you actually facilitate cooperation in that way? There's another challenge very specific to the pharmaceutical industry, which is, again, India has been very central to generic pharmaceutical manufacturing. In fact, it produces, it's essentially the big pharma manufacturer of the world. And I've seen statistics, I don't have the latest statistics, but over 50% of generics available in the US, I think, are now sourced from India. The US pharmaceutical companies, though, are focusing on sort of the next generation of pharmaceuticals and are much more concerned about IP protection. And so that has led to this clash between companies like Pfizer and others in the US and India, the Indian government. And the Indian government basically believes that sometimes some of the claims to extend some of the IP are spurious, that they believe this only to make money, they make very marginal changes to a drug that then charge 5-10 times the amount. So again, the dialogue on health is not where it should be between the two countries, the cooperation is not. The question I think going forward is how can the US leverage cooperation with India to help reduce costs here? And how can India work with the United States to extend coverage in India? You don't have health insurance coverage to the same degree as such. But how can you do it at a low price point? And that I think is the central challenge. But we've had this stuff in the way. Again, there have been some very creative solutions around license production. So there are companies like Gilead and Mylan here, which have done license production in India. They brought down the cost of this is vaccine for hepatitis drugs and stuff like that quite significantly. But I think medical machinery, again, is an underdeveloped area. A lot more can be done in that space. And then also training people.
Please identify yourselves before you ask a question. That would be great. Go ahead. Switch on the mic. Switch on the mic. Yeah.
Oh, you just project.
Yeah, it's okay.
Thank you for the talk. And I'm Jaishankar. I'm a third-year PhD student in Optics and Photonics program here. So my questions are interconnected. I have two questions and kind of follows up on what you said that every year there are thousands of students who come here. And over time, some of us do decide to stay and become part of in not only the United States, but like other countries throughout the globe. So are there programs or initiatives that India is trying to attract the talent back to the country? That's my first question. And the second is, there are people who are naturalized citizens or who were born here but has Indian ancestry, and they want to work towards making India a more better country. Are there opportunities where people who stay here and other places can actually work in a grassroots level in India? And is there any sort of global platform?
There are a few things. One is India has actually made it incredibly easy for if you are either somebody of Indian origin who's naturalized in another country, you're an American now, you're an American citizen or British or something, or if you are of Indian origin but born here and you're second, third generation Indian origin. The Indian government has now made it legally very easy to go back to India and work there, live there, and work there, right? So they've created something called Overseas Citizenship Citizen of India, OCI. It is, despite the name, not citizenship, which is very confusing. It's a terrible name. But what it does is effectively, it functions more like a green card. So, you can live there, work there, open a bank account, get paid, all of that. I don't know too many other countries that offer something that is, once you get it, you can travel back and forth. There are now some restrictions on what you can do, research, certain kinds of research, journalism, a few things that make it a little harder to do. But on most things, if your interest is purely business or social work or something like that, it should not be a problem. So legally, it's very easy. Apply. If you haven't done so already, apply. It takes maybe a few weeks to get it from the consulate here, and once you have the card, you can go. The challenges are there incentives to do that. There are about I've seen one estimate that about 700,000 US citizens in India. I presume most of these are people of Indian origin who moved back, in some cases born because their parents are there or something. But that's actually quite a sizable number. Are there incentives to go work? Not many, and certainly not, if that idea of competing with talent here, that is very hard to do. They can offer similar salaries and benefits. Yeah, I mean, I moved back to India after working in the US, and I because I wanted to do it, and I took I was getting less than half what I was getting paid here. But I made a call that that's what I wanted to do for a little while. So unless you do that, or you have a personal reason for moving back, the incentives aren't there. There are a few things, initiatives, but they're quite small. So, for example, this is a purely private enterprise. There were a group of people who brought philanthropists came together and started something called IndyCorps, which is modeled on the Peace Corps. And it was again to people who are out of schools who can go and work. They would place you somewhere in India, you could go work there for a few years and then come back. But again, those private philanthropy is hard to scale it up. There's also been some talk of doing something similar to what Israel does, which is sort of a birthright to come visit for 2 weeks and get to know the country and things like that. There is an annual day of the Indian diaspora. It's actually it's January 9th. It was just held. They do a big conference in one part of India. The Prime Minister usually comes for that. But it's not quite the same. It doesn't answer that question of are you willing to work. Ultimately, I think it will have to, again at scale, it will have to be market-based. And at some point, unless Indian companies are willing to offer attractive terms to lure talent back, it will be very difficult.
Thank you for that question. A part of that grassroots question is also the mandate of the India Center, right? So thank you for raising that, and hopefully we'll work on that. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Guru Prasad. I'm alumni of UCF, and a few folks remember me from a long time. I just got back here 2 days ago. I got my master's and PhD here as the first simulation graduate at UCF. I came to work on the space shuttle robot in 1989. Ended up doing a lot of work for the military here. And one of those military simulators led me back to India. For the last 8 years I've been in India. My family still stays close by to UCF. I've invented this keyboard. It may answer a few questions. This keyboard was invented in Orlando. This is the Indian language keyboard. All right. So with your mother tongue, you can type any Indian language. 62% of the population in India don't speak English or don't. They need to know English to type their language. So that would remove the digital divide. I told my wife 6 months I'll be back. It's been 8 years now. That's the challenge for some of you. Know what it takes to make a hardware and sell a hardware in India to make a grassroots change. Because there was no ecosystem there, there was no content, there was no labs. So we had to build everything from scratch. So now this has become very popular. The students are doing moon landing animation, space docking animation. So the mother tongue ability to express has changed. People are selling saris, clothes online using their mother tongue. They can sell it to an Italian. So we have put a small speech-to-text interface in the keyboard. So things change. The world's largest population is in India, youth population. So for us to sell anything to India, any products, we can't miss that market, right? So one is to remove the barriers to enter. So one is language is something that we try to address. My question is, I've been on several missions to DC and elsewhere. Some of these folks in this room know quite well. We have missed too many buzz or opportunities to build, particularly in defense and space. These two sectors, too many opportunities were lost. So I want to pick your brain on that as to how that could change, because the window is very small right now. And if we don't do it now, we may miss it altogether. Second thing is, we have even designed chips right here in Orlando. I don't know if you guys know, UCF owns a fab, used to own a fab, chip making facility right here in Orlando, packaging facility, and it's now taken by Skywater Fabs. So the first designed in India chip made in Orlando, so we're still working on very much fine details. It's happened. So this partnership do exist. So Orlando is a great chance to get into semiconductors with all the UCF kids, and I see Dr. Sundaram right here. I picked his brain quite a bit. Or it's probably not Sundaram, I guess. Okay. So I'll come many times here to build that, so that right now the cost of the chip is $10. Here in US we cannot afford to buy that chip, right? So China is making it for 20 cents. So India is dire need of chips. We have fabs here. It's a great opportunity for India to do in that sector, semiconductor, particularly for things like this to reach common folks. So we expect some policy change. We need some guidance on how the government of the United States can give subsidy for these kind of things, both India as well as the United States. Because the $10 chip is not affordable anyway, even in the US. Something has to be done fast, not just building fab facilities, but for people who package it and use it. So my question to you, sir, is why we missed the bus on these two important sectors, and how can we catch up on it?
So I mean, that's a pretty, I actually go a lot of it into the book about particularly the defense and tech sector. I mean, a lot of it had to do with India's own procurement processes and choices in the 1980s and 1990s. I spoke a little bit about this at a time particularly when India didn't have the financial capabilities that it does today. Some of it had to do with export controls, and India being outside some of the export control regimes until 2008, certainly. And that has changed gradually since then. I'm actually very positive on defense and space cooperation between the US and India. I think a lot has changed in the last even 3 to 5 years, and mostly for the positive. And I can point to very concrete examples of how that is changing. So let's take defense, for example. Today, the Indian military uses 8 platforms that were made in the US, 8 American platforms, from transport aircraft and the P-8I to artillery made in the US. This would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. If you look at co-production, it's quite significant. There's about $3 billion of Indian exports of defense articles to the US, mostly subsystems. Boeing and Lockheed Martin both have joint ventures in India with Tata's, are manufacturing in Hyderabad. So the level of co-production has actually gone up quite significantly in the last few years, including for platforms that India does not use. So there's the parts of the F-16 aircraft that are made in India, even though the Indian Air Force does not fly F-16s. Again, I'm quite optimistic. I expect to see in the next few weeks even some movement on a few more potential platforms between the US and India, because it's something that Trump administration is pushing quite significantly. So I think we're now at a very different stage where the question is about terms of, it's really a sort of B2B, it's no longer at the government-to-government level. It is really can the business terms be worked out to make the business case for this agreement, which is sometimes more tricky because these are private negotiations. So I think we're at that stage. It's always a good problem to have, but on that front. On space, I think again there are many reasons for it, but in 2023, India joined the Artemis program. In the next few months, we will see the first Indian astronaut go out to the US as part of the US program. It will be the first Indian astronaut in 40 years. The only previous one went up in 1984. So it's been a while. So I'm sure it's so exciting for US-India space cooperation. But I think again this is just the beginning, not the end. There are many other programs underway for space. In fact, there was a very big Indian business delegation that just went out to SpaceX 2 weeks ago. They actually Elon Musk hosted them. They watched they watched the launch that did not succeed, the explosive space. But the fact is there is that private engagement that is underway. So I'm quite optimistic on defense and space. There's been quite a lot of forward progress, and I expect more. On semiconductors, it's a bit more tricky. There's a global shortage, everyone knows this, there are concerns about supply chain. So India is trying to get in a number of ways. Actually, there are three ways of looking, three aspects of the semiconductor space. On the design side, there's already a very big Indian presence. So everyone, NVIDIA, to you name it, they have some kind of presence in India already on the design side. The second step is the second most complicated step is the ATP, the advanced testing and packaging phase. And there India is trying to make inroads. There are two facilities that have been, actually three that have been identified, two of which are one in Assam. The expectation is we're going to see some more in that space. And then the third, the most difficult one is the fab. And again, there's been one that they had some groundbreaking on, and that's expected to come online. But the idea is to get, in some ways, India is going to initially be operating in the legacy chip space, not at the cutting edge, but there is a sort of degree of comfort even in the US with India, because there's just a sense that the more the merrier. Whereas the Chip and Science Act funding, at least initially, was very much focused on smaller nodes, because that was considered more of a security priority in the US. So all I'm saying is that there are complementarities even in the semiconductor space. The question is how much will a Trump administration actually focus on what's called friendshoring, which is moving manufacturing to friendly countries, versus reshoring, bringing it back to the US, and that still remains an open question.
Thank you. We're going to take a last question. The food is getting cold. We don't want that. Okay. Okay.
Dhruva, thank you very much for the talk. 30,000 feet tall, 30,000 feet wide. Got a lot of knowledge from this talk. And my question is about, you briefly mentioned that the higher education tech insularity that is there in India. And that's the sector I have interfaced with most, both as a consumer and now, on the other side of the table. The thing that I want to ask you is, India has so many of these technological gaps that are there, and some we are trying to fill by, getting technology from abroad. How did this insularity of the technical higher education sector, where they did not completely intertwine the way it is in US or somewhere else, to the point that a lot of technical graduates don't even want to be engineers. They just go and do financial services, they do marketing, they do all kinds of stuff, but not engineering. And we have let that happen generations after generations for 20, 30, 40 years, completely defeating the purpose of having a higher education sector. So the question is, how did this happen? Is it because scientists were not there in the decision making? Is it myopia, or what exactly happened that we lost the bus on that one?
I wish I knew the right answer, so whatever I say is very tentative. I think it seems to be two things, at least, and there are probably more reasons as well. One is, for whatever reason, there was very little emphasis on PhD level research, right? So if you take the average IIT person, they sometimes do a master's or anything. The IITs themselves don't do a lot of PhD level research, and this is reflected still in publications. Yes, the lab, quantitatively, India produces a lot of scientific publications, but if you adjust for quality and stuff, that's not there. So we're not seeing that sort of basic research, being done in a way that you've seen in other places. Most notably, the US and even China is making it. So it's whether it's basic research or applied research, which China has focused more on. So for some reason, there was never really that emphasis and that incentive structure created, whether it was funding or what it was to create, to scale up. So you can produce 10 million engineers undergraduate degree a year, but if you look at the fraction that go on to do masters, then the PhDs are. So again, this is 15 years old. At one point, India was producing like about 50 computer science PhDs in the whole country, right? Not that long ago, right? I'm sure the numbers have improved. We're talking as one large computer science department here, right? So I think partly it was just this disincentive structure that built up over doing that kind of work. The second thing is, you never had the alignment which you've seen in some places of private industry with academia, right? And so, when you see like the Cambridge corridor come up, or you see like, the research triangle in North Carolina, Silicon Valley is a good example of this as well. You never had that sort of, that ecosystem emerge. Again, that's changing now a little bit. You're seeing some pockets in certain places, but it's not been done. And part of it, I think, was just it's a legacy of a mixed economy. That you never had the private enterprise business. So if you had options, so as a combination of those two things, it led to the system where again often the aspiration for people was you went to IIT, which is one of the top engineering schools, went to IIM, got a business degree, and then you went abroad, and then you were very successful in Google or Microsoft or something like that. Right? So that became the aspirational. Not everyone was going to do it, but that's what people wanted to do. So I think that's the best tentative answer I can give you, but there are probably other deeper reasons.
Was this already understood long time back, or is this?
I mean, I know, for example, the Indian government report from 2006 that essentially said this, so we need to get out of this. Now, again, different matter that what can be done about it, but it's not that this issue hasn't been identified.
Yeah, and it would be the same if you go back to 1960s, as Dhruva was head
Probably,
of
yeah.
Science and Technology.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
Ministry of Science and Technology. So,
Just to give you an example, I found there was a committee in the 1970s by P.N. Hudson, which was on electronics manufacturing. They were worried about Japanese exports, not Chinese, they were worried about Japanese electronics exports to Asia. So they said we need to get in on the act. But then after 2 years, we didn't really do anything.
So thank you, Dhruva, for contributing. And we deserve all the applause. Let me just end here with two